Right now, someone is using dark psychology on you. Maybe it's your boss who praises you one day and ignores you the next, keeping you desperate for validation. Maybe it's a partner who makes you question your own memory of conversations you know happened. Maybe it's a friend who somehow always makes you feel guilty for setting boundaries. You don't notice it because these tactics work in the shadows. They exploit the exact mechanisms your brain uses to survive, to connect, to trust. And the people using them. Most learn these patterns from someone who used them first. They're passing on psychological warfare disguised as normal human interaction. But here's what changes everything: once you understand how these tactics work, once you see the pattern, they lose their power. Knowledge isn't just power in this case. Knowledge is armor. Knowledge makes you unbreakable. And that's exactly what I'm about to give you. 73% of people report experiencing psychological manipulation in personal relationships. That's 3 out of 4 people. But here's the disturbing part: only 18% can identify the specific tactics being used against them. The rest just feel confused, anxious, or guilty without understanding why. Psychologists discovered the foundation of these techniques in the 1950s when Dr. Robert Cialdini began studying compliance and persuasion. What he found changed everything we understood about human influence. Our brains have built-in shortcuts, automatic responses designed to help us make quick decisions. These shortcuts keep us alive in emergencies. But they also make us vulnerable to exploitation. Today, narcissists use these techniques in relationships to maintain control. Corporations use them in marketing to manufacture desire. Cult leaders use them to break down identity and rebuild dependency. Politicians use them to bypass critical thinking. And most people never realize they're being targeted until years of damage have already been done. The cost isn't just emotional, it's neurological. Brain scans of long-term manipulation victims show changes in the prefrontal cortex identical to those found in trauma survivors. But understanding these tactics doesn't just protect you. It transforms you. Because when you know how psychological manipulation works, when you can spot it in real time, you become someone who can't be moved, can't be shaken, can't be broken by techniques that control everyone else. You've experienced this. Someone close to you twisted a conversation until you apologized for something you didn't do. A colleague took credit for your work while making you feel selfish for mentioning it. A family member made you feel guilty for living your own life. That confusion you felt, that moment of thinking maybe you're too sensitive, maybe you're remembering wrong, maybe you're the problem. That wasn't self-awareness. That was a psychological manipulation technique called gaslighting, and it was working exactly as designed. And once you understand how it works, you'll never fall for it again. Before I reveal the 5 dark psychology tactics that will make you mentally unbreakable, hit subscribe. Understanding these psychological weapons is the only way to defend against them. Your awareness protects not just you, but everyone around you who's still vulnerable. Let's continue. The first technique is called intermittent reinforcement, and it's the foundation of every toxic relationship you've ever witnessed. In psychology, this is called a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement. It was discovered by B.F. Skinner in the 1930s during experiments on operant conditioning. Skinner found that unpredictable rewards create stronger behavioral patterns than consistent rewards. A rat pressing a lever gets a food pellet sometimes but not always. The rat presses obsessively, unable to stop, because the next press might be the one that delivers the reward. Here's how manipulators use it: they alternate between extreme affection and cruel withdrawal. 1 week, you're the center of their universe. They text constantly, shower you with compliments, make you feel seen in ways you've never experienced. Then without warning, they go cold. Messages go unanswered. Affection evaporates. They're distant, critical, or completely absent. Just when you're about to give up, they return with intensity, and the cycle starts again. In romantic relationships, You see this with partners who are passionate and attentive during the honeymoon phase, then gradually introduce criticism, silent treatment, or emotional absence. Just when you're ready to leave, they have a breakthrough moment of vulnerability or romance that pulls you back in. The cycle continues: intensity, withdrawal, return, repeat. In the workplace, bosses use this with praise and criticism. One day you're the star employee, getting public recognition and promises of promotion. The next week, nothing you do is good enough. Then suddenly, another burst of validation. You become addicted to those moments of approval, willing to tolerate increasingly poor treatment because you're chasing the high of being valued again. This works because of dopamine. Your brain releases this neurotransmitter when you experience reward, but it releases even more during anticipation of reward. Unpredictable rewards create the strongest dopamine response. That's why gambling is addictive. That's why you can't stop checking your phone. That's why you can't leave someone who hurts you 90% of the time but makes you feel amazing the other 10%. The inconsistency isn't a flaw in the relationship. It's the entire mechanism of control. Real-world example: in 2019, psychologist Dr. Ramani Durvasula documented a case where a woman stayed in an emotionally abusive relationship for 7 years. Her partner would ignore her for weeks, then surprise her with elaborate romantic gestures. The woman described it as being addicted to the person who was poisoning me. Brain scans showed her reward centers lit up when thinking about her partner in ways identical to cocaine addiction patterns. It took 2 years of therapy to break the psychological dependence, even after she intellectually understood what was happening. You're experiencing intermittent reinforcement if you find yourself constantly trying to recreate good moments with someone. If you're walking on eggshells trying to keep them in a good mood. If you make excuses for their behavior because when things are good, they're so good. If you feel anxious when things are going well because you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Once you recognize this pattern, the spell breaks. You stop blaming yourself for the cold periods. You stop believing the warm periods mean things are getting better. You see it for what it is. A control mechanism that has nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with keeping you destabilized. The second technique is gaslighting, and understanding its progression makes you immune to reality distortion. Gaslighting isn't just lying. It's a systematic attack on your perception of reality designed to make you doubt your own mind. The term comes from a 1938 play where a husband dims the gas lights in their home while insisting to his wife that the lights haven't changed. She begins to question her sanity. Modern gaslighters use a predictable 4-stage progression. Stage 1 is subtle contradiction. They disagree with your memory of minor events. We never discussed that. I never said that. You're remembering wrong. These are small moments, easy to dismiss as misunderstanding. You let it go. You give them the benefit of the doubt. But your subconscious registers the contradiction, creating a tiny seed of self-doubt. Stage 2 is escalation through emotional invalidation. Now they're not just contradicting facts, they're invalidating your feelings. You're too sensitive. You're overreacting. You're being dramatic. When you get upset about something they did, the conversation shifts to why your emotional response is the real problem. You start questioning whether you're too emotional, whether your standards are unreasonable, whether you should just let things go. Stage 3 is isolation of your support system. The gaslighter creates scenarios where your friends and family seem unreasonable or unsupportive. Your mom is toxic, she just wants to control you. Your friends don't understand our relationship. Nobody else would put up with you. Slowly, you pull away from people who might offer reality checks. The gaslighter becomes your primary source of information about yourself and the world. Stage 4 is complete dependency on the gaslighter's version of reality. By this point, you genuinely can't trust your own perceptions. You defer to them about what happened, how you should feel, what's reasonable to expect. You've been trained to doubt yourself so thoroughly that you need their validation to feel sane. They've become the authority on reality, and you've become dependent on their interpretation. Research by Dr. Robin Stern, author of The Gaslight Effect, studied 300 victims of sustained gaslighting. She found that 78% developed symptoms of anxiety disorders. 63% experienced depression. 41% reported persistent confusion about their own memories even years after leaving the relationship. MRI studies showed reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for executive function and reality testing. Why don't you notice this happening? Because each step feels small. Each individual incident seems too minor to confront. And gaslighters are skilled at making you feel crazy for caring about little things. By the time you realize your entire sense of reality has been compromised, you're already too deep to trust your own assessment of the situation. The recovery process is specific. First, you document everything. Write down conversations immediately after they happen. Save text messages. Keep a journal. External records give you something to check your memory against. Second, you find witnesses. Include others in important conversations so you're not the only one who heard what was said. Third, you trust your emotional responses even when you can't pinpoint exactly what's wrong. If something feels off, it probably is. Your instincts are a faster processing system than your conscious mind. Real-world documentation. In 2021, journalist Stephanie Fu published a memoir detailing gaslighting by a partner who convinced her she'd never mentioned her childhood trauma, despite her having written articles about it that he'd read. She described feeling like I was living in a fog, unable to trust basic facts about my own life. She eventually recorded conversations without his knowledge. When she played them back, hearing him say things he later denied saying, it broke the spell. She said it felt like waking up from a nightmare into reality. You're experiencing gaslighting if you constantly second-guess yourself around someone specific. If you apologize constantly even when you're not sure what you did wrong. If you feel confused after conversations with them. If you've stopped bringing up concerns because it always ends with you being the problem. If you've noticed yourself saying things like I must be crazy or maybe I'm just too sensitive more than you used to. Once you understand the progression, you can spot stage 1 and walk away before you reach stage 4. You stop giving people the benefit of the doubt when they contradict your clear memories. You trust yourself first, others second. You become someone whose reality can't be rewritten by someone else's narrative. Have you experienced these stages with someone in your life? Comment below. Your recognition might be the reality check someone else needs. The third technique is triangulation, and recognizing it makes you immune to manufactured jealousy and competition. This technique exploits your natural human need for belonging and your fear of being replaced. Triangulation occurs when a manipulator brings a third person into the dynamic between you and them to control you through comparison, competition, or jealousy. The mechanism works through social comparison theory. Psychologist Leon Festinger discovered in 1954 that humans evaluate themselves through comparison to others. We don't have objective measures of our worth, so we look at how we stack up against people around us. Manipulators weaponize this by constantly introducing comparisons that leave you feeling inadequate. In romantic relationships, they talk about ex-partners constantly, especially highlighting what those people did that you don't do. My ex used to cook every night. Sarah never complained about my gaming. They flirt with others in front of you or maintain inappropriate relationships while insisting you're jealous and controlling for noticing. They pit you against other people they claim are interested in them, creating a sense that you're in competition for their affection. In families, narcissistic parents triangulate children against each other. One child is the golden child who can do no wrong. Another is the scapegoat who gets blamed for everything. The roles might switch unpredictably. Siblings learn to compete for parental approval and view each other as threats rather than allies. This fractures sibling relationships while keeping the parent at the center of power. In workplaces, manipulative managers create hierarchies of favorites. They share information with some employees but not others. They praise one person's work while criticizing another's identical effort. They encourage competition for resources, projects, or recognition. The team fractures into competing factions rather than uniting to question the manager's behavior. The four-stage progression is predictable. Stage 1, the manipulator establishes themselves as a scarce resource. They're the source of love, approval, or opportunity, and there isn't enough to go around. Stage 2, they introduce the third party. This might be an actual person or a vague reference to others who are better than you. Stage 3, they amplify comparison. They praise the third party while criticizing you, or they alternate praise to keep everyone competing. Stage 4, you and the third party compete for the manipulator's attention instead of recognizing the manipulator as the problem. Research by Dr. Carol McBride, specialist in narcissistic family systems, studied over 500 adults raised by narcissistic parents. She found that 89% reported damaged sibling relationships due to triangulation. 67% said they didn't trust their siblings even as adults. 73% said they spent their childhood trying to earn parental approval by being better than their siblings rather than forming genuine bonds. Why you don't notice? Because the manipulator frames it as your insecurity. They say you're jealous, possessive, or competitive by nature. They make you feel ashamed of your emotional response to being compared unfavorably to others. You start policing your own feelings, trying to be more secure, more easygoing, less bothered by behavior that would bother anyone. The recovery process requires seeing the pattern. First, notice who benefits from the conflict. If you and a coworker are competing while your boss faces no accountability, your boss benefits. If you and a sibling are fighting while your parent plays victim, your parent benefits. Second, refuse to compete. When someone introduces a comparison, respond with indifference. Good for them and nothing more. Don't defend yourself, don't try to prove you're better, don't engage. Third, build alliances with the other people being triangulated. Talk to the other woman he's using to make you jealous. Talk to your sibling about your parent's behavior. The manipulator's power evaporates when you unite instead of competing. Real-world case study, in 2018, organizational psychologist Dr. Laura Crawshaw documented a corporate case where a CEO systematically triangulated 3 vice presidents. He would tell each one privately that they were his favorite, then publicly praise a different one at each meeting. The VPs began undermining each other, sabotaging projects, and hoarding information. The company's performance tanked. When one VP finally talked to another and they compared notes, they realized the CEO had been telling all 3 contradictory stories. They took their documentation to the board. The CEO was removed. Within 6 months, with the triangulation gone, the 3 VPs rebuilt trust and the company recovered. You're experiencing triangulation if someone frequently mentions other people who are supposedly better than you at things. If you feel in competition with others for someone's attention or approval. If you and someone else are both upset with a third person but somehow end up fighting with each other instead. If someone tells you private information about what others supposedly said about you. Once you see triangulation, you can't unsee it. You recognize the pattern immediately. You refuse to compete for someone's affection or approval because you understand that the scarcity is manufactured. You become someone who builds alliances instead of burning bridges, someone who questions the source of conflict instead of engaging in it. The fourth technique is the love bombing and devaluation cycle, and understanding this makes you immune to idealization followed by destruction. Love bombing is the practice of overwhelming someone with affection, attention, and validation at the beginning of a relationship to create rapid attachment and dependence. Then, once attachment is secured, the manipulator shifts to devaluation, criticism, and withdrawal, creating cognitive dissonance that keeps the victim trapped trying to recreate the initial intensity. The principle behind this is simple but devastating: humans form attachments through investment and intensity. When someone shows extreme interest in you, mirrors your values perfectly, claims you're their soulmate, and creates a whirlwind romance or friendship, your brain releases oxytocin and dopamine in amounts comparable to drug use. You bond quickly and deeply. In romantic contexts, love bombing looks like this: they text you constantly from day one. They want to spend every moment together. They introduce you to friends and family immediately. They talk about future plans, vacations together, moving in, even marriage, within weeks. They shower you with compliments, gifts, and attention. They claim to have never met anyone like you, that you understand them like no one else, that this connection is once in a lifetime. This feels amazing. You think you've found something special. Everyone warns you it's moving too fast, but you tell them they just don't understand the connection. Within weeks or months, you're deeply invested emotionally, maybe financially, maybe practically. You've rearranged your life around this relationship. Then the devaluation begins. Suddenly you're not perfect anymore. They start pointing out flaws. The constant communication drops off. They become critical, dismissive, or cold. They compare you to ex-partners. They suggest you've changed or tricked them. The person who claimed you were their soulmate now acts like you're a burden. You're devastated and confused. What changed? What did you do wrong? How do you get back to how things were at the beginning? You try harder. You change yourself. You tolerate more. You accept treatment you never would have accepted from someone you met normally. Because you invested so much so quickly, and because the beginning was so intense, you can't accept that it's over. You're sure if you can just fix whatever's wrong, you'll get back to that perfect beginning. But that perfect beginning wasn't real. It was a carefully constructed performance designed to secure your attachment. And the devaluation isn't about anything you did. It's about the manipulator having secured your investment and no longer needing to perform. The 4-stage progression is clockwork. Stage 1, idealization. You're perfect. The relationship is perfect. Everything is intense and magical. Duration, weeks to a few months. Stage 2, small devaluations. Little criticisms. Subtle mood shifts. You notice but dismiss them as stress or bad days. You're still mostly in stage 1. Duration, overlaps with stage 1. Stage 3, overt devaluation. The criticism becomes constant. The affection largely disappears. You're chasing the high of the beginning while accepting worse and worse treatment. Duration, this becomes the new normal. Stage 4, discard or cycle. They either leave you devastated and confused, or they cycle back to stage 1 just long enough to secure your attachment again before returning to stage 3. Corporate applications of this look different but use the same mechanism. Companies recruit with aggressive enthusiasm. Amazing salary, incredible benefits, unlimited potential, perfect culture fit, you're exactly who they've been looking for. Once you've accepted, moved, maybe relocated your family, given notice at your previous job, the reality emerges. The salary has caveats. The benefits don't apply yet. The culture is toxic. The promises were oversold. But you've already invested so much in taking the position that you stay, trying to make it work, tolerating conditions you never would have accepted if they'd been honest from the beginning. Online echo chambers use this with information. New members are love-bombed with validation. Finally, someone who understands. These people get it. You're so smart for seeing what we see. The information shared feels revelatory and exciting. Dopamine spikes. Once you're invested in the community, in the worldview, the information becomes increasingly extreme. But you're already attached to the group identity. You've already invested your self-image in being someone who sees the truth. So you accept more and more extreme positions because the alternative is admitting you were wrong, losing your community, and confronting the fact that you were manipulated. Research by Dr. Carla Ivankovic, studying rapid-onset relationships, found that relationships that progressed to "I love you" within the first month had an 84% failure rate within the first year, compared to a 37% failure rate for relationships that took 3 to 6 months to reach that point. The faster the intensity, the shorter the lifespan. More significantly, 71% of those who experienced love bombing followed by devaluation reported trust issues in subsequent relationships that lasted years. Why don't you notice you're being love bombed? Because it feels good. It feels like finally being seen, being valued, being special. Red flags that would be obvious in slower developing relationships get ignored because the intensity is intoxicating. Friends and family who express concern seem jealous or unable to understand the connection. By the time the devaluation starts, you're already so invested that you can't see the pattern clearly. The defense strategy is setting pace boundaries. No matter how amazing someone seems, maintain a reasonable pace. Don't introduce them to everyone important in your life in week 1. Don't make major life changes in month 1. Don't accept declarations of soulmate status before they've seen you sick, stressed, or angry. Time reveals character. Intensity reveals agenda. Anyone pushing for rapid escalation is either emotionally immature or deliberately manipulating attachment mechanisms. Real-world documentation. In 2020, journalist and cult survivor Sarah Berman wrote about her experience with XIBM, an organization later prosecuted as a cult. She described the recruitment as the most intense positive attention I'd ever received. They were fascinated by everything I said. They told me I was brilliant, insightful, exactly the kind of person they'd been hoping to meet. Within weeks, she'd paid thousands for courses, introduced them to her social circle, and begun recruiting others. The validation was addictive. By the time the criticism and control tactics began, she'd invested too much of her identity and resources to walk away easily. It took her 3 years to leave and another 2 to deprogram. You're experiencing love bombing if someone is moving the relationship faster than you're comfortable with while making you feel silly for hesitating. If they're making grand declarations before they actually know you deeply. If they're pushing for commitment, access, or investment before you've seen them handle conflict, stress, or disagreement. If something feels too good to be true, it probably is. Once you understand this pattern, you become someone who values consistent behavior over intense beginnings. You let relationships develop at a pace that allows character to reveal itself. You don't mistake intensity for depth. You become immune to the performance because you know real connection builds slowly through demonstrated behavior, not through overwhelming displays and premature promises. Have you noticed these patterns in past relationships? Share your experience below. Your story might help someone recognize what's happening to them right now. The 5th technique is DARVO: deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. Understanding this makes you immune to having accountability conversations turned against you. This technique was identified by psychologist Dr. Jennifer Freyd, who studies betrayal trauma. She noticed a consistent pattern when perpetrators are confronted: they deny the behavior happened, attack the credibility of the person confronting them, then reverse the roles so that the perpetrator becomes the victim and the actual victim becomes the attacker. The mechanism exploits your desire to be fair and your fear of being a bad person. When someone you care about claims you've hurt them, your instinct is to feel bad, to examine your behavior, to apologize. DARVO weaponizes that instinct. Here's how it works in practice. You confront someone about something they did that hurt you. Their response follows 3 steps. Step 1, deny. I never said that. That didn't happen. You're misremembering. The denial is confident and emphatic, designed to make you doubt your memory or perception. Step 2, attack. You're too sensitive. You're always looking for problems. You're the one who does this all the time. They shift attention from their behavior to your character, your flaws, your history of being difficult. Step 3, reverse. Suddenly they're the victim. They're hurt that you would accuse them. They're the one being attacked. They're the one who deserves an apology for being treated so unfairly. By the end of the conversation, you're apologizing to them for bringing up your legitimate concern. You're comforting them for being upset that you were upset. You walk away feeling guilty for having needs or boundaries. The original issue never gets addressed. In romantic relationships, this looks like confronting a partner about flirting with someone else and ending the conversation apologizing for being jealous and controlling. Asking your partner to help more with household responsibilities becomes you being criticized for being demanding and unappreciative. Expressing hurt about something they said becomes you being too sensitive and them being victimized by having to walk on eggshells around you. In workplace settings, reporting harassment becomes you being accused of trying to destroy someone's career over a misunderstanding. Pointing out discriminatory treatment becomes you playing the victim card and creating division. Requesting reasonable accommodations becomes you asking for special treatment and being unfair to co-workers who don't complain. The progression is rapid and disorienting. You entered the conversation as someone with a legitimate concern. Within minutes, you're defending yourself against accusations. Within 5 minutes, you're apologizing. Within 10 minutes, you've forgotten why you brought up the issue in the first place. You just want the conversation to end. Research on DARVO by Dr. Freud's team found that when institutions use DARVO in response to abuse allegations, victim satisfaction with the process drops to 4%. 4%. Victims report higher rates of depression, anxiety, and PTSD from the institutional response than from the original abuse. The betrayal of having your reality denied and reversed causes deeper trauma than the original harm. Why don't you notice this pattern? Because it happens so fast and so smoothly. The conversation shifts beneath your feet before you realize it's happening. By the time you're defending yourself against attacks, you've lost track of the fact that you came to discuss their behavior, not yours. And they're so convincing in their hurt and outrage that you genuinely start to believe you're the problem. The defense strategy is maintaining frame. Before the conversation, write down the specific behavior you're addressing. During the conversation, return to that specific point every time they deflect. We're not discussing my sensitivity right now, we're discussing the fact that you said X. Refuse to defend yourself against character attacks. Whether or not I'm too sensitive isn't the issue. The issue is what you said. If they can't stay on topic after 3 redirects, end the conversation. I came to discuss X. If you're not willing to discuss X, this conversation is over. Also crucial, recognize that an apology that includes but or if isn't an apology. I'm sorry but you were being annoying is DARVO. I'm sorry if you felt hurt is DARVO. A real apology acknowledges specific behavior and its impact without justification or deflection. Anything less is manipulation. Real-world case study. In 2017, journalist Ronan Farrow documented Harvey Weinstein's use of DARVO in response to sexual assault allegations. Weinstein's team denied the allegations, attacked the credibility of the women coming forward, and claimed Weinstein was the victim of a conspiracy to destroy him. This pattern was so effective that it worked for decades. When actress Ashley Judd first spoke up in the 1990s, she was labeled difficult, lost roles, and was painted as someone with an axe to grind. It took 20 years and dozens of women using the same DARVO defense strategy, maintaining frame and refusing to be derailed, before accountability finally occurred. You're experiencing DARVO if every time you try to address a problem, the conversation ends with you apologizing. If you've stopped bringing up concerns because it always backfires. If you find yourself comforting the person who hurt you. If you constantly feel like you're the problem even though you're not the one causing harm. Once you recognize DARVO, You can spot it in the first 5 seconds. The immediate denial, the character attack, the reversal. You stop engaging. You maintain your frame. You trust your original perception. You become someone who can't be flipped into the villain role when you're simply asking for accountability. After experiencing gaslighting, do you now recognize DARVO in your past? Comment below. Understanding these patterns protects you and everyone you share this knowledge with. Now that you understand the techniques, you need to understand the people who use them. This is the Dark Triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. These aren't casual insults. They're personality constructs identified through decades of psychological research. And while most people exhibit some of these traits occasionally, individuals high in Dark Triad traits exhibit them consistently, deliberately, and without remorse. Narcissism is characterized by grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy. Narcissists genuinely believe they're superior to others. They require constant validation to maintain their self-image. In relationships, they choose partners who reflect well on them, discarding those partners when they no longer serve that function. They struggle to see others as fully human with independent needs and wants. Everything gets filtered through how it affects them. In relationships, narcissists love bomb intensely because your adoration feeds their need for admiration. They devalue when you fail to maintain their idealized image of themselves. They triangulate because competition for their attention confirms their special status. Red flags include constant need to be the center of attention, inability to handle criticism, rage when their authority is questioned, tendency to take credit for others' work, lack of genuine interest in your life unless it relates to them, pattern of short-term intense relationships that end badly. Research shows approximately 1% of the population meets criteria for narcissistic personality disorder, but up to 6% score high enough on narcissistic traits to cause significant relationship problems. Studies of narcissists in long-term relationships found that their partners report feeling drained, invisible, and like supporting characters in the narcissist's life story rather than equal participants in a mutual relationship. Machiavellianism is characterized by manipulation, strategic thinking, and emotional detachment. Unlike narcissists who need admiration, Machiavellians simply want control and will use whatever means necessary to achieve it. They view relationships as transactions. They're calculating rather than impulsive. They plan manipulation rather than reacting emotionally. In workplace settings, Machiavellians excel at corporate politics. They build strategic alliances, eliminate threats, and climb hierarchies through manipulation rather than merit. They're the colleague who takes credit for your work while befriending your supervisor. They're the manager who hoards information to maintain power. Research shows that while Machiavellians make up roughly 2 to 3% of the general population, they're overrepresented in leadership positions because their strategic manipulation is rewarded in competitive environments. Machiavellian red flags include charming but calculating behavior, relationships that seem strategic rather than genuine, willingness to lie or manipulate without apparent guilt, tendency to pit people against each other while remaining above the conflict, rapid shifts in loyalty based on advantage, ability to fake emotions convincingly. A documented example, in 2019, organizational psychologist Dr. Oliver James profiled a CEO who scored extremely high on Machiavellian traits. This CEO systematically identified employees' insecurities, exploited them to secure loyalty, then discarded those employees once they were no longer useful. He maintained power for 12 years through strategic manipulation, creating a culture where employees competed brutally and trusted no one. When he was finally removed, 23 harassment complaints emerged from people who'd been too afraid to report while he had power. Psychopathy is characterized by lack of empathy, impulsivity, and absence of remorse. This is distinct from narcissism and Machiavellianism in a crucial way. Psychopaths don't feel guilt. Narcissists feel shame when their image is threatened. Machiavellians calculate consequences. Psychopaths genuinely don't experience emotional connection or moral constraint. Not all psychopaths are violent criminals. In fact, research by Dr. Kevin Dutton found that professions with the highest rates of psychopathic traits include CEO, lawyer, surgeon, and journalist. These are successful psychopaths who channel their traits into careers that reward emotional detachment and ruthless decision-making. They're excellent in crisis situations because they don't panic. They make brutal business decisions without emotional interference. They're charming and charismatic when it serves them. The danger is in personal relationships. Psychopaths mimic emotions they don't feel. They study what responses get desired results and perform those responses. Your pain doesn't register emotionally for them beyond how they can use it. They use intermittent reinforcement not because they understand its psychological impact, but because they've learned empirically that inconsistency creates dependency. Red flags include superficial charm that feels slightly off, grandiose stories about themselves, lack of long-term friendships, pattern of getting bored with relationships quickly, absence of genuine emotional depth, tendency to blame others for everything, excitement around others' misfortune, lack of realistic life goals despite grandiose self-image. Approximately 1% of the population meets criteria for psychopathy, but up to 4% score high enough on psychopathic traits to cause significant harm in relationships. Brain imaging studies show reduced activity in the amygdala, the region associated with fear and emotional processing, and reduced connectivity between emotional centers and decision-making regions. The most dangerous individuals exhibit all three traits. Dr. Delroy Paul Huss, who developed the Dark Triad assessment, found that people high in all three traits are especially dangerous because they combine the narcissist's need for dominance, the Machiavellian's strategic manipulation, and the psychopath's lack of empathy. These individuals leave trails of destroyed relationships and damaged people while feeling no remorse. When you encounter someone with these traits, traditional relationship strategies don't work. Setting boundaries makes you a challenge to overcome. Communicating your needs gives them information to exploit. Showing vulnerability becomes ammunition. The only effective strategy is distance. You can't fix them. You can't love them into empathy. You can't outmanipulate a manipulator. If you recognize these patterns in someone close to you, particularly if you recognize multiple traits or all three, the healthiest response is strategic withdrawal. Don't announce you're leaving or try to explain why the relationship isn't working. They'll use that information to manipulate you into staying. Simply reduce contact gradually, become boring and unresponsive, and rebuild your life in spaces they don't occupy. Have you encountered someone who displayed multiple Dark Triad traits? Understanding what you experienced is the first step to healing. Share your awareness below. Now that you understand the tactics and the people who use them, here's how you protect yourself and become mentally unbreakable. When you can't go no contact with a manipulator, become as interesting as a gray rock. Give boring, minimal responses. Show no emotion, positive or negative. Manipulators feed on reaction. When someone gets nothing from interacting with you, they move on to more responsive targets. Example, they criticize you to get a reaction. Instead of defending yourself or getting upset, respond with okay or and change the subject. They share dramatic news to pull you into their chaos. Respond with "that's interesting" without follow-up questions. Practice this consistently for 2 weeks and watch them lose interest. This works because manipulation requires engagement. No engagement, no power. Keep records of conversations, agreements, and incidents. When someone uses gaslighting or DARVO, documentation gives you reality anchors. Use a private journal app with timestamps. After important conversations, write down what was said while it's fresh. Save text messages and emails. Take photos of relevant situations. This serves two purposes. First, it gives you something to check against when someone claims a conversation didn't happen or went differently. Your memory might doubt itself, but your documentation doesn't lie. Second, patterns become visible. When you read back through 3 months of interactions, the manipulation tactics jump out in ways they didn't individually. Therapists recommend this for anyone recovering from gaslighting. Reality anchoring through documentation rebuilds trust in your own perceptions. You become someone whose reality can't be rewritten. The moment you notice someone triangulating, build bridges with the people they're using against you. Talk to the coworker your boss pits you against. Talk to the sibling your parent favors then scapegoats. Talk to the other woman in a triangulation scenario. 9 times out of 10, you'll discover they're being manipulated too. Red flag checklist. Someone frequently mentions what others supposedly said about you. You feel in competition with specific people for someone's attention. Someone shares secrets about others to create divisions. If you see 3 or more, you're being triangulated. Action: reach out directly to the person you're supposedly in competition with. Share what you've been told. Compare notes. The manipulator's power evaporates when targets unite instead of competing. You become someone who builds coalitions rather than fighting manipulated battles. No matter how amazing someone seems, maintain reasonable relationship pacing. Refuse to make major decisions or life changes in the first 3 months of knowing someone. Don't introduce them to your important people or give them access to sensitive information until you've seen them handle conflict, stress, and disappointment. Resources: therapists who specialize in trauma and manipulation patterns can help you identify red flags you might miss. Books like The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker teach you to trust your instincts. Support groups for narcissistic abuse survivors provide community with people who understand these patterns. Timeline: if someone pushes for rapid escalation, moving in together, marriage talk, meeting family, financial entanglement, within the first 6 months, that's a red flag. Healthy relationships can wait. Manipulative ones can't, because the performance is exhausting to maintain long term. Time reveals truth. Practice maintaining frame during confrontations. Before addressing an issue, write down the specific behavior you're confronting. During the conversation, return to that exact point every time someone tries to deflect. Use this phrase: "We're discussing X right now. We can discuss Y later, but right now we're talking about X." Daily practice: review past confrontations where you ended up apologizing for bringing up legitimate concerns. Identify where DARVO happened. Recognize the deny-attack reverse pattern. Imagine the conversation again with you maintaining frame instead of getting derailed. Timeline: most people need 30 to 60 days of conscious practice before frame maintenance becomes automatic. Track conversations where you successfully maintained frame versus where you got derailed. You'll see improvement within 2 weeks. You become someone who can't be flipped into the villain role when simply asking for accountability. Your reality stays yours. Which defense strategy resonates most with you? Comment which one you're implementing first. Your commitment to growth inspires others. This isn't just about individual manipulators and personal relationships. These tactics are institutionalized in advertising, politics, social media, and corporate culture. We're all swimming in manipulation, and most of us don't even realize the water is toxic. Social media monopolizes your attention, which means platforms are financially incentivized to use manipulation tactics that keep you scrolling. The intermittent reinforcement of unpredictable likes and comments. The FOMO created by seeing everyone else's curated lives. The algorithmic echo chambers that show you content designed to trigger strong emotional reactions rather than content that's accurate or healthy. Facebook's own internal research, leaked in 2021 by whistleblower Frances Haugen, showed the company knew Instagram was harmful to teenage girls' mental health, particularly around body image and self-worth. They knew. They kept the algorithm unchanged because engagement, even harmful engagement, was profitable. Advertising has weaponized insecurity through strategic devaluation. You're shown images of perfect bodies, perfect homes, perfect lives, not to inform you but to make you feel inadequate. That inadequacy drives purchasing. You're not buying products, you're buying the promise of becoming adequate. Marketing expert Martin Lindstrom documented in his book Brand Washed how companies deliberately create anxiety and insecurity then position their products as solutions. This is gaslighting at scale. You're told your normal body is a problem. Your normal home is embarrassing. Your normal life is insufficient. Then sold products to fix problems that don't actually exist. Politics increasingly uses DARVO and triangulation. Politicians deflect from legitimate criticism by attacking the credibility of critics. They pit demographic groups against each other to secure their own power, manufacturing conflicts that prevent coalition building. They deny documented facts while accusing fact-checkers of bias. Researchers at Harvard studying political rhetoric found that DARVO responses to scandal increased by 47% between 2000 and 2020. What was once an occasional tactic has become standard crisis management. The cost is measurable. The American Psychological Association reports that rates of anxiety disorders increased by 31% between 2008 and 2018. Depression rates increased by 33%. Loneliness, despite increased digital connectivity, reached epidemic levels. Researchers at San Diego State University found that the rise in mental health crises corresponded directly with the rise of smartphone adoption and social media use. We're experiencing psychological warfare disguised as connection. Economically, manipulation costs billions. Workers trapped in toxic workplaces through intermittent reinforcement and gaslighting experience higher rates of burnout, physical illness, and job turnover. The estimated cost to U.S. businesses from toxic work cultures is over $200 billion annually in lost productivity, healthcare costs, and turnover. Relationships destroyed by manipulation patterns result in divorce, custody battles, and family fragmentation with measurable economic impacts. The mental health treatment industry exists partly to repair damage from systematic psychological manipulation. But the invisible cost is trust erosion and reality distortion. When gaslighting is normalized, when DARVO is standard political rhetoric, when triangulation is how we consume news and social media, we lose the ability to trust our own perceptions and to trust others. We become a society of people walking around doubting ourselves, competing with each other, and accepting manipulation as normal. The real question is, do we accept this as normal? Do we teach critical thinking and manipulation recognition in schools so children learn to identify these tactics early? Do we hold platforms and institutions accountable for weaponizing psychological vulnerabilities for profit? Do we create legal protections for psychological abuse that match the protections for physical abuse? Do we demand that relationship education include recognition of these patterns so people can identify red flags before investing years in toxic dynamics? Because awareness alone isn't enough. Individual defense strategies aren't enough when the entire system profits from your confusion and vulnerability. We need structural change. We need accountability for institutions that deliberately employ these tactics. We need education that makes manipulation techniques visible from childhood. We need cultural shifts that stop romanticizing intensity and start valuing consistency, that stop accepting DARVO from authority figures, that stop rewarding Machiavellian behavior in leadership. Comment if you believe this should be policy. Psychological manipulation tactics, including gaslighting, DARVO, triangulation, and intermittent reinforcement, should be taught as part of mandatory education starting in middle school, with the same seriousness we teach about physical safety and consent. And if you think these patterns need to be exposed, if you believe awareness is the first step toward being unbreakable, if you want to protect yourself and others from psychological warfare disguised as normal interaction, then hit that subscribe button. We're not stopping. We're going to keep exposing these tactics. We're going to keep teaching defense strategies. We're going to keep demanding better from institutions that profit from manipulation. We're going to keep fighting for a world where psychological warfare isn't normalized, where manipulation isn't accepted, where people are equipped to recognize and resist these patterns. Knowledge is your defense. Awareness is your shield. Once you see these patterns, you can't unsee them. You become someone who recognizes manipulation in real time. Someone who maintains their own reality. Someone who can't be gaslit, can't be triangulated, can't be destabilized by intermittent reinforcement. Someone who builds boundaries that hold. Someone who sees through love bombing to the calculation beneath. Someone who maintains frame when confronted with DARVO. You become mentally unbreakable. This isn't just about individual manipulators. It's about all of us and the society we choose to tolerate. Do we accept manipulation as normal, or do we demand better? The choice, as always, starts with awareness. And awareness starts with you, right now, understanding exactly how these tactics work and refusing to be moved by them ever again. You're not too sensitive. You're not crazy. You're not the problem. You're someone who's been targeted by techniques designed to work on everyone. But now you see them. And once you see them, they lose their power. That's what makes you unbreakable.